Welcome to this video on the Zen Word channel. My name is Sri Satguru, Buddha Rawa Bhagwan. I am the integrated Adishree. Today we will talk about spiritual superiority on the battlefield. When there is a conflict, and this applies to any type of conflict, right? There are different manifestations or potential forms that this conflict can take. Now, it can be an energetic conflict at the level of energy systems, energy distribution systems. This is one of the most typical types of conflicts. You know, one for energy, one for resource, one for wealth, one for land, one for ideology, one for greed, things like that. So there are different reasons why conflicts erupt. Okay, sometimes someone's just having a bad day. So when there is a conflict, there's different forms that the conflict can take, right? Such as, for example, forms of offense, where one individual or one organization or one group or nation, for example, or planet, comes under the attack of someone who wants their land. So when someone comes and wants your land, you need to defend your land, okay? Everybody wants peace and happiness, but you have to be willing to fight for that when that's challenged. It's part of being honorable, and part of also being grateful for the life you've had up to now in your homeland, and hopefully it was good, and hopefully you had some good moments, and hopefully you realize that your homeland matters to you, especially if it's a good place where you live, that you really love, right? That you owe allegiance to. So anyways, sometimes conflicts erupt, right? Conflicts happen, and as every citizen is involved and impacted by these conflicts, for example, conflicts between nations in whatever form that they take, and each citizen contributes in the way that they can, right? Well, the spiritual leaders of a country also contribute in times of conflict to end the conflict, right? So you'd think that spiritual leaders are going to be intervening in let's all have a prayer and do a kumbaya and sing all together in a chant, holding hands. But that's not exactly how it takes place, okay? Because spiritual practitioners, okay, are beings that have come closer to the divine, okay? And depending on different levels of their growth and development in the divine. So as they do that, they are empowered with abilities of the divine. Okay, so these abilities, yes, although these abilities can help them spread love and work on love, but also sometimes, there's also a fire and a heat and a fierceness in the spiritual practitioners, right? And they can use their abilities also to wage war, right? So as you may know, looking at the description of this channel, this is the channel of the Vara lineage of God, of Ishvara, the lineage of Shiva himself. And I am the avatar of Shiva, the founder of the lineage of the gods, incarnated. So, as you can see, there's a war component because Shiva is also known as Lord of War, Lord of the Vara, right? So, Ishwara. So Shiva of the Wara, right? So, anyways, when conflicts are up, as all citizens have a duty to protect and support their country, as long as their country is in the right, in these things, because the duties of a spiritual practitioner is to protect the culture of the country, to the culture of the land, right? So the spiritual practitioners are an integral part of the life of the land, and they also get implicated at the spiritual level when there's a conflict, right? So in this way, in all conflicts, all beings are spiritual beings, and all beings are sometimes falling under an Ishtadevata, whether they're aware of it or not, right? Whether that be God himself or a being underneath or anything like that that looks over them. So in all conflicts, for example, there's an interaction of spiritual beings as well, right? And depending on the power of one spiritually versus the other, right? Well, what can be done is spiritual superiority can be achieved. So that's basically going through, destroying the protections, the spiritual protections of the other party, right? All of them, right? Across the board, wiping them. So then basically, like you would have air superiority, right? On a battlefield, if you have the better airplanes, right? Well, in the same way, you can have spiritual superiority where you're no longer challenged spiritually, which means this leaves the other nation, in that case, susceptible to all the attacks by anyone else spiritually. All the curses, all the divine attacks, all the attacks from everyone, everything. So the other party loses all their spiritual protections. Okay? Because the gods that were protecting them before this conflict, right? Either were the same gods and abandoned them now, or were other gods and were defeated, or were other gods that are on the same side or underneath the god that's attacking them now, so they just move over and help, actually, the assist in the attacks, right? So, for example, a lot of cultures, they believe in Jesus and the angels and all that, right? But when you have God the Father that comes, the angels and Jesus work with him, right? So, and there's different examples of that with different types of gods and different cultures, different Shri gods, enlightened beings, saints. So this is the channel of the Wara lineage, and Yahweh is a yogi of the Wara Parampara who became a white god in the system through the Wara Parampara of Ishwara. Okay. So the gods become gods through Wara culture. So in a conflict, spiritual superiority is sought by the spiritual practitioners of the country, of both countries, essentially, right? And spiritual superiority is achieved. So what happens when there's spiritual superiority? It means that the whole other country loses all their spiritual defenses, as do all their people. So what that means is basically anyone can target them with any kind of spiritual attack, and they're no longer protected by anyone. So it'll go through. So it's like a free for all, hunting season, right? And they have no means to defend themselves. So anyone, and then basically, so anyone can pick up any kind of spell, and not even be very powerful in these things, but it's still going to go through, And then what happens is you then have the, who establishes spiritual superiority? It's the top spiritual practitioner of the country, right? So it's the responsibility, and the responsibility for the war is given to that individual and to their top individuals and all these things. And then basically what usually establishes spiritual superiority in a conflict is the top spiritual practitioner of each country or organization, or individuals in a case of individuals, right? So the top spiritual practitioner has the duty and responsibility for the country that is challenged, right? Because on the other flip side, if you're the offensive country, you're the country on the offensive, maybe your top spiritual practitioners aren't even going to come to your defense, depending on who you're going after too, So maybe you'll get abandoned by your own spiritual practitioners, right? And then that's just the disintegration of the country. It is the duty of the top spiritual practitioner, the top spiritual master, the highest level spiritual being of the country, to establish spiritual superiority in a conflict of any type, between any type of organizations, groups, or nations, or planets, right? Once spiritual superiority has been achieved, then it is the duty of the spiritual master, the top spiritual master of that country, right, to empower all in the country, all everywhere, through their gods, or if they are gods, or in any way that they do it, so that anyone can go, for example, on YouTube and just look up, for example, most effective curse spell, or something like that, or all these little things, and then people try these things for fun, and then there's no karma, bad karma, for using anything to defend your homeland. Your homeland, you defend. When you're threatened with annexation or something like that. So when you have spiritual superiority, right, then you, as the spiritual leader of the land, you empower everyone in the land to use these types of spells, right? So that you could have like a 17-year-old boy or whatever, who knows nothing about spirituality, who's told you're now empowered to use curse spells, who could go onto YouTube, who could basically just see the most basic curse spell and could curse the other country or individuals in that other country or people and all these things, bind them, curse them, darken them, all these different types of things, because what happens is the spiritual battlefield works at 99% of creation, when all you see in the physical here is only not even 1% of creation. So the spiritual battlefield is extremely important, and there's a lot of techniques. So, one of the things that you do when you engage in a conflict, in the modern era, or in any era, at the spiritual level, is one of the things you're going to do is you're going to bog, you're going to bog, you're going to bind, you're going to blind, you're going to tie, you're going to turn, you're going to lead. You're going to do lots of stuff, right? You're going to do lots of different things, and you're going to do it to the whole other group or block. So visualize systems in a computer, and different blocks fall under different names or countries, and they're operating in different ways, and sometimes they get competitive with each other and try to take over the other block. So then it becomes a competition of the blocks. And what is the biggest level of competition, right? How fast you can move, right? How fast you can deliver your payloads, in your intent to either resist and fight back of being trying to be taken overload, your block being overtaken, or how fast, so that's how it is. It's how fast the payloads can be delivered, right? And everyone's moving information. Everyone's moving around. Everyone's carrying information as vehicles that are their bodies, which are called containers. So containers move information in the system. So basically, alliances, regroupings under nations, right, of containers and information, right, and a vibration that we hold, the people that we are, and our land, right, our territory, our space in the system is threatened by another block, right? So what we want to do is we want to deliver our payloads, okay, and then we want to spiritually, right? It's all happens spiritually, because in the modern era, with all the modern weapons and all that, you can't do anything other than spiritually, so it's all done spiritually. So you deliver all your payloads, right? You go get everything. You remove the people you want to remove. You do stambana on the ones you want to do stambana. You do all these different things, right? So visualize blocks of systems competing against other blocks of systems. And one block of systems decides we're going to come and take the space and resources of the other block of systems. Then the other block of systems engages in a war spiritually. And when I say spiritually, okay, you have to understand when I say it's only spiritually, it means it's only in all things. Because all things are spiritual. 99% of things are spiritual, and 1% is the physical that you know here. Okay? So, yes, it also implies the physical, right? As people try to end the conflict, the one that's on the receiving side, especially if they're weaker, they try to put up such a fight that the other one will never think about coming for them again. And then they build so that it'll never happen again. And put in place the measures and weapons to defend themselves and all these different things. Including diversifications of economies and all these different things. So all the different systems and system functions all coming together. So that's what it is. So when there's a war between different blocks, okay, different nations, the spiritual practitioners have a responsibility, of the nations have a responsibility to fight with their block, right? So one of the most effective techniques is to slow down the enemy, right? To slow down all their processes, to, interrupt their planes, interrupt their electrical systems, because stambana can not only be done, for example, on the mind of an individual or on the body of an individual, but it can also be done on electrical systems. You can actually stop, for example, a turning what do you call it? Aérien, a turning turbine or something like that, or whatever. You can stop something like that, on a vehicle or something like that. That's not difficult. So you can stop electronic or mechanical devices as well. So basically that's what happens. When you get into a conflict between blocks, a block has announced their intention to take the other block. Okay, at that point now the block has to defend themselves. So different blocks have different strengths and different weapons and are limited and restricted in how they can use them, right? But spiritual weapons are not restricted, because they're very difficult to associate to a specific individual as well. Most people don't take claim for what they do at the spiritual level. So something happened to you guys. Well, who did it? Who knows, right? It was empowered by God. You can't complain. When someone goes, it's because God wants them to go, right? So yeah. So conflicts are very, very unfortunate when there's conflicts between blocks, but it happens. It's a part of the history. It's a part of the story, how it goes, right? So at that point, the gods get involved as well. The gods that protect those blocks, and then the gods basically start putting in place their processes. So it becomes a battle at the level of the gods, sometimes a battle at the level of the spiritual practitioners, a battle at the level of the workers, all trying to be more productive, a battle at the level of the people delivering things, trying to be more productive. Everybody tries to be more productive, and the spiritual practitioners basically come and sabotage the productivity of the other side in the conflict. Bog down their resources, punish them with storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, all these different things, do all these things to basically take out their system efficiency, So what happens is once spiritual superiority has been achieved, and spiritual superiority has been achieved, okay, then all the individuals of all the other blocks that support and are involved in that as well, that have the intention to fight on the side of the one who achieves spiritual superiority, can now also freely, without any resistance, use any kind of spiritual attacks to attack the one who lost spiritual protection over their lands, because spiritual superiority was achieved against them. So at that point, you can have the most unadvanced spiritual practitioner anywhere that could even pick up a little basic spell, curse spell, and could just with that little kill curse spell or something like that, take out the leadership of the other block or something like that. Just anyone, So anyone's free to participate. You just basically take on the spells and the curses, and you are empowered because to go through. The connection has been established. So that's one way of seeing it as well. Establishing spiritual superiority is establishing a connection of delivery of payload. So as the Aztec gods, Tezcatlipoca, the god of division, the god of night, the god has the arrows, right? His arrows with different tips, they deliver payloads. So sometimes it's you have to be very careful too, when you decide as a block that you're going to go challenge another block, because you have to assess a lot of things. Maybe you don't know too much about war, maybe you're not a great general or something like that, and somehow you became the leader of a country or a block, and you're not a lord of war. And then basically maybe you make a strategic mistake and you think that, for example, you're strong in many ways. For example, potentially you have a strong military army or something like that, but that doesn't mean anything against the gods, So you have to be very careful to judge when you go into a conflict, that not only do you judge the power of their, how many they are, the size of their block, their resources, their efficiency, all these different things. If you're going to take over their block, their ability to resist physically, but you have to also judge the spiritual battlefield. And are you able to achieve spiritual superiority? Because if you cannot achieve spiritual superiority, you should never attack an opponent. Because they'll come and get you, and they'll get you, and they can basically declare essentially they can guide and change the development of your whole storyline, if they have spiritual superiority over you. and they can really hit you with all these things that you can't dodge, that you can't protect against, because unlike physical defenses, which you can harden, right, and you can protect, once spiritual superiority has been established over you and your people, you can no longer block, you can no longer defend. There's no way to resist. So they're always going to come through. All these different attacks are always going to come through and hit you from everywhere. And as I said, even the most inexperienced person could pick up a book of curses and throw them at you, and you'd think that you'd be safe from such a person, you know, because of your affinity to God or whatever. But at that point, it's because the gods that protected you no longer protecting you. You know, spiritual superiority has been achieved against you in the conflict. So at that point, once you lose spiritual superiority, you know, once you realize that you made that mistake and you didn't get it, you know, at that point, from a strategic point, at that point, you back off, because once someone has spiritual superiority over you, that also means that your people are at risk no longer also of their physical lives and of your physical processes, but also where you go after death. You know, the eternal lives of your beings are now at risk. You know, so that's the real scary one, right? Thank you for listening to this video on the Zen Warrior channel.